Good morning, Debo.
Good morning, Will.
Just getting set up here. I'm kind of at an angle, sorry. Oh.
Yeah, the wall. Yeah.
There we go. That's getting.
I think you're still sharing the screen.
Yes. Yeah. You can see it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Should we start?
It's 9:30, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Welcome to the morning session. My name is Peter Illich. I'm at the Center for Language Research at ISU University. So the first session will have 4 speakers. The first speaker will be myself, and the title will be The Challenge of Information Communication Technology in Education. The second speaker will be Professor John from the Center for Language Research at University of ISU, and his title is Created Digital Artifacts, Rapid Production and Incremental Improvement. This will be followed by William Martens and Wang, and their title is Applying Adaptive Recognition of the Learner's Vowel Space to English Pronunciation, Learning by Native Speakers of Japanese. Following this, we'll have a 10-minute break, and then we'll have a keynote from Professor Hiram Campos of the University of Monterrey, Mexico. His title is Biomechanics in Rehabilitation Engineering. Okay, so we'll have 4 talks altogether. All right, so we'll start the first talk, which is my presentation. This is a recorded presentation, and I'll take a few questions after if we have time. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to my presentation. My name is Peter Illich. I'm a faculty member in the Center for Language Research at the University of ISU. The title of my
Debo, your microphone needs to be on.
Peter, you said something?
Debo,
Yeah.
your microphone needs to be on. Microphone.
Sorry about that.
and reduce resistance to introducing
That's great.
disruptive technologies such as smartphones. The affordances of ICT in education open many possibilities to integrate with and support existing curriculums. However, many educational institutions have not fully embraced these opportunities. The educational field is characterized by training teachers to use specific online tools, but a clear understanding of the theory informing the use of these tools to transform our educational practice is often overlooked. Theories always change more rapidly than practice, so when a new cognitive theory is developed to compensate for previous one's inadequacy, there is an inevitable lag in adoption by instructional designers. This may be one reason that, rather than transforming pedagogy through the affordances of new technologies, it is a common tendency of educators to merely integrate technology into traditional behaviorist ways of teaching. For example, many institutions' learning management systems, or LMS, are mainly used for standard administrative purposes, to distribute resources or information, or to complement or replicate traditional educational practices. So this presentation will discuss some factors that inhibit educators from exploiting the broad range of affordances offered by ICT. In its simplest form, education can be seen in two ways: learning as a product or learning as a process. When we look at learning as a product, so learning as a relatively permanent change in behavior, gaining knowledge, or filling an empty vessel, so discrete instances of acquisition. Process, learning as building upon previous experiences, a process of participation. Similarly, technology in its simple form can be seen in two ways. So technology is the use of scientific knowledge for practical purpose or applications. This is the definition we'll be using for this presentation. Technology as artifacts and devices, so material tools and artifacts that are used to do something, or technology as activities and practices, so the processes and practices of doing something. It is clear that there's no shortage of demand for new and useful technologies. As we can see in this chart, technology adoption rates measured as a percentage of households in the United States using a particular technology. We can see that once a technology is identified as being useful or popular, it rapidly becomes almost ubiquitous, and even ubiquitous in some cases. So there is a strong demand for new technology. At the same time, there is always a worry or concern about the negative effects of a new technology. This concern about technology is not new. Here we can see an example from 1906, which is very similar to today's situation. The caption reads, "These two figures are not communicating with one another." We can see here that this is a common concern today as regards mobile phones and the lack of communication. This is true also for technology in relation to education. There is always a concern when a new disruptive technology enters the education world that it may have a negative effect on existing abilities. For example, if we go back to the days of Plato, there were concerns that the introduction of writing on wax tablets would negatively affect the memory of students. Along with the worries about educational technology, it was common for people to overstate the importance of a technology. Here, Thomas Edison says, "I believe that the motion picture is destined to revolutionize our educational system, and that in a few years it will supplant largely, if not entirely, the use of textbooks." Of course, he was the one selling the machine. Again, going back to the concerns, this time about television in the classroom. So in the 1960s, television viewing, regardless of its content, may be detrimental to cognitive and educational development. This was a common concern. Here's another example of concern, the calculator. So it may negatively affect learning of basic skills by developmental mathematics students with respect to increasing mathematical performance. However, there is evidence showing that this is not true, and in fact, the calculator does not negatively influence mathematical performance. Concerning the technology of the internet, today's concern is that the internet and related technologies cause a shallow or lack of depth to thinking. So here, this popular book by Carr, to quote him, "The depth of our intelligence hinges on our ability to transfer information from working memory, the scratchpad of consciousness, to the long-term memory, the mind's filing system. A break in our attention can sweep its contents from our mind." So he writes about how the negative effects of attention can impact our short-term memory, which in turn impacts our ability to think deeply about topics. This tension between the positive and the negative effects of technology has been investigated by Krakauer, who built upon the work of Norman. He divides technology into two categories. The first is complementary cognitive artifacts. These are the artifacts that complement human intelligence in such a way that their use amplifies and improves our ability to perform cognitive tasks. And once a user has mastered the physical artifact, they can use a virtual mental equivalent to perform the same cognitive task at a similar level of skill. His example is the abacus. The other category is competitive cognitive artifacts. These are artifacts that amplify and improve our abilities to perform cognitive tasks when we have use of the artifact. But when we take away the artifact, we are no better and possibly worse at performing the cognitive tasks than we were before. So he argues that we have to understand which of these the technologies we introduce to education are. Are they complementary cognitive artifacts, or are they competitive cognitive artifacts? Next, we'll look in detail at educational theory as it applies to ICT. At the level of theory, education can be divided into four major theoretical frameworks: behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and connectivism. In the early 20th century, behaviorism developed from the work of several researchers as a counter-argument to the Freudian emphasis on the unconscious mind within an environment dominated by positivism and the rise of the scientific method. As positivists, they viewed the mind as an inaccessible and therefore irrelevant black box. The rise of behaviorism coincided with mechanization in the labor force and demands for an increasingly educated population through compulsory education. Industrialization required workers who could read, write, and perform tasks repeatedly and reliably. This theory fits well to instructional design based on specific and discrete learning steps and mechanization of this process through new forms of learning technologies. Behaviorist learning technologies started as simple teaching machines that resembled typewriters and used paper slips to record answers. Skinner expanded on these ideas to develop programmed instruction where self-instruction of the content was linked with self-testing. Both technologies were mainly focused on hardware rather than content. In the 1950s, computer-assisted instruction, or CAI, was developed using drill and practice approach to learning. The United States Department of Defense became a major funder of CAI and developed two of the early systems: programmed logic for automated teaching operations, or PLATO, with the University of Illinois, and time-shared interactive computer-controlled television, or TICCIT, with the University of Texas. The military reported a reduction in learning time from 24% to 54%. Cognitivism emerged as a reaction to behaviorist theory. but it did not reject behaviorist science altogether. So aspects of the older theory survived in the newer theory. Cognitivist learning theory was a response to behaviorists' rigid emphasis on the direct link between stimulus and response. Cognitivist psychologists argued that the link between stimulus and response was not straightforward and that there were several other factors involved. The cognitivism paradigm led to several influential learning theories, including cognitive information processing, which views the brain as a type of computer. Other influential work included schema theory and Gagne's conditions of learning, which bridged the gap between behaviorism and cognitivism. Social cognitive learning theory, unlike behaviorism, emphasizes that the environment and the cognitive factors influence behavior. These learning theories and others led to many changes in instructional design that included concept mapping, component display theory, and structural learning theory. In CAI, the computer evaluates the learner's response with appropriate feedback and then branches the learning into either moving ahead or to a review. The branching action is designed by the programmer and is a behaviorist form of instructional design. As computer technology advanced, these branching programs became more complex and eventually led to the development of intelligent tutoring systems, or ITS. Whereas CAI is content-free, ITS are much more complex and based on specific domains taught to the individual students by the computerized tutor. The term constructivism refers to both the learning theory and the epistemology of learning, and the term constructivist refers only to the learning theory. Both are generally distinct from behaviorism and cognitivist theories of learning. In the 20th century, the main theorists associated with constructivist approaches were Piaget and Vygotsky. Constructivist theory suggests that people construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiencing the world and then reflecting on those experiences. When people encounter new ideas, new things, and new perspectives, they must reconcile the new with prior understanding. If the new does not fit with previous understanding, the person must decide to discard it, integrate it with existing views, or change existing beliefs. Some influential learning theories that emerge from this paradigm include communities of practice, discovery learning, case-based learning, and simulation-based learning. The learning technologies associated with constructivism are often called learning environments or microworlds, and they are usually computer-based software that is open-ended to enable and require active user input. Technological implementation of this theory have succeeded and include educational programming language Logo, Apple HyperCard software, and New York University's computer-supported intentional learning environment, or CSILE. Finally, introduced in 2004 by George Siemens, Connectivism is a learning paradigm that considers the technological developments during the last few decades, such as chaos theory, self-organization, and networks. The idea is that a networked environment without instructors and course structure can facilitate learning. So, learning is based on the notion of network intelligence, in which the computer network, independent of humans, controls the links of each learner. The learning process is focused on connecting information sources and maintaining those connections because the body of knowledge is rapidly changing. So knowledge transferred to students becomes less efficient over time. Here we can see an example of one of those early testing machines. Here is Sidney Presley using his invention, the Presley testing machine, developed in 1930. Here's one of the machines developed by B.F. Skinner, which is more complex than the previous machine. This is in the 1950s. Here is another of Skinner's machines, but a more advanced model from the 1960s. The caption reads, "A recent model of a teaching machine for lower grades. The machine operates on the principle of described in the accompanying article. Material is presented in a window with a few letters or figures missing. The pupil moves sliders which cause the letters or figures to appear. When an answer has been composed, the pupil turns a crank. If the answer was right, a new frame of material moves into the window and the sliders return to their home position. If the answer was wrong, the sliders return, but the frame remains and must be completed again." Here we have another learning machine from the 1960s. And another view. The caption reads, "By 1965, predicts one authority, half of all United States students will make use of machines." Here's a Plato system mentioned earlier, developed by the United States Department of Defense. And here is the TICCIT system, also developed by the United States Department of Defense. Next, I'd like to look at some of the more general barriers to ICT implementation that can be found in the management systems are posting content-based resources such as web pages and lecture notes, collecting assessments from students through digital versions of traditional assessment methods. While these activities aid instructors in the administration of classes, activities that demand student collaboration or reflection are used less frequently than those that replicate face-to-face teaching modes. The relatively stable traditional classroom learning context includes common resources, consistent schedule and location, and a single instructor with an agreed curriculum. So when technology is incorporated, it is essential that it does not create a completely separate space, but instead adds to the continuum of learning and bridges the moments of learning. Learning analytics is a powerful technique for education and has received a lot of attention recently in the research literature. Here we can see how it relates to similar fields. Learning analytics provides feedback based on the analysis of learner data, which are believed to have beneficial effects on both learning and the learning environment. However, there is the added concern of the laws controlling information used on these systems. Applying learning analytics interventions in practice on the different actors, processes, and outcomes involved is a complex task requiring expertise in a data collection, data analysis, and relevant course content knowledge. For example, testing on mobile devices is a similar issue since, without on-site supervision, teachers have little reason to trust that the students will participate honestly. Also, learning outcomes such as constructivist self-regulated learning skills are challenging to measure, so learning analytics should move away from mere performance-based evaluation of learning analytics projects and include measurements related to learning processes and learning environment. The effects of learning analytics on learning must be defined, as often the measured learning proxies such as grades and LMS activity can be overly narrow and miss much like the student activity outside of class. Stakeholder confidence with technology was linked to better computer integration, but teachers that lack this confidence have had the opposite effect. An issue that frequently appears in the literature is a lack of skilled personnel, technology support, and material development available in the educational institution, which can have broad-ranging effects on decisions to adopt ICT. There is also a widespread lack of awareness of the educational affordances offered by ICT. Also, there are always some administrators or teachers that lack motivation to invest the considerable effort required to integrate ICT. Some teachers hold strong negative attitudes to including ICT because the devices are not immediately associated with education. A frequently cited issue is that the mobile context afforded by ICT increases the chance for distraction, while making it more difficult for teachers to follow up on learning achievements. Also, educators mention the lack of class time outside of regular responsibilities needed to integrate technology into the existing curriculum. At the administrative level, a lack of funding often leads to poor ICT infrastructure, which is another barrier to teachers cannot overcome on their own. This can also cause low connectivity rates that make many of the ICT approaches impractical. Even if there is a robust infrastructure in place, the lack of software tools or the lack of devices to run those tools are more barriers to adoption. It is important to remember that the adoption of mobile technology is no guarantee of the adoption of mobile services, and vice versa. Japan has made great efforts in trying to introduce ICT technology into society and into education. I want to look at several of their policies from 1985 to 2011. In 1985, the first report of the National Council on Educational Reform noted the increasing significance of ICT in Japanese education. In this report, this informationalization of education consisted of three elements: children's information literacy, utilization of ICT in course instruction, and utilization of ICT in school administrative works. In the 1986 second report on National Council on Education Reform, the qualities that enable individuals to utilize information and information media were added to the existing core subjects of reading, writing, and arithmetic. In 1987, the report on the Curriculum Council led to the introduction of the 1989 introduction of a new elective subject called Basic Information into technology and home economics classes at the lower secondary schools. Then, the 1998 report on the Curriculum Council led to designating the subject Information and Computers in technology and home economics classes at the lower secondary schools as a compulsory subject, and established a new compulsory subject Information for general education courses at upper secondary schools. The 2001 Basic Act on the Formation of an Advanced Information and Telecommunication Network Society included considerations of the urgent need to keep pace with the rapid and drastic changes on a global scale arising from ICT through introducing measures for the formation of an Advanced Information and Telecommunications Network Society. Towards this goal, the Act called for developing strategies, determining local and governmental responsibilities, the establishment of a strategic headquarters for the promotion of an Advanced Information and Telecommunication Network Society, and developing a priority policy program. The 2001 Act helped to establish several national strategies about ICT in education. The first was the 2001 eJapan Strategy 1, which was focused on network infrastructure and aimed for Japan to become the most developed country in the world in ICT. By the end of 2003, the high-speed internet access was available to 60.6% of the population. The second strategy came in 2003, the eJapan Strategy 2, focused on social economic structures with an emphasis on the use and applications. By the end of 2003, e-government electronic filing of Government of Japan was 96%, and e-commerce internet trade or stock market was 23% of all exchanges. The final strategy from the 2001 Act was the 2004 U-Japan initiative, which focused on developing a ubiquitous network society. The 4 U's of this strategy included ubiquitous, anywhere, anytime, anyone, anything; universal, so networks are comfortable to use for people; user-oriented, needs of the user; and unique, vitalization of society and business. In 2008, the report of the Central Council for Education called for cross-curricular improvements for coping with social conditions concerning the ICT environment and the importance of information education. However, this ICT development did not filter down to the life of the average citizen. The cause of this was identified as a past emphasis on the use of digital technologies, a prioritization of technology, and an excessive emphasis on the perspectives of manufacturers and service providers. Then, in 2009, iJapan Strategy 2015 towards digital inclusion and innovation was launched and shifted the focus from technology to create a digital society where all citizens can accept human-centric digital technologies developed from the perspective of citizens. This strategy's goals included developing easy-to-use digital technologies, breaking down barriers to using digital technology, ensuring security when using digital technologies, and creating a new Japan where digital technology and information are diffused throughout the economy and society. Many of the goals leveraged ICT's well-known affordances, including rapid feedback, active knowledge making, differentiated learning, and ubiquitous learning. The 2011 report entitled The Vision for ICT in Education went even further to focus on the affordances and stated that ICT is very important, but nothing more than a tool with potential limitations. The report listed many potential uses and affordances of ICT in education. Despite these initiatives, in 2009, Japan was still seen as lagging behind other peer countries in the transition to an information-based society. Japanese universities have received the majority of the blame for these results for several reasons, including a low adoption rate for ICT tools such as learning management systems, and a reported lack of staff to produce digital content. ICT services at the minimum level, learning management systems, or LMSs, used at universities in developed countries were 60% in the United States and South Korea. In Japan, national universities were at 80%, but public universities were 40%, and private universities, which made up the bulk of universities, were only 20%. ICT tools most widely introduced by Japanese universities are 89% for syllabus systems, 79% for campus Wi-Fi networks, 63% for student information systems, 28% for official social networks, 26% for e-portfolios as opposed to 50% in the United States at the same time, 20% to 1% for learning management systems used for all courses, as opposed to 90% in the United States at the same time, 11% for open courseware, and only 4% for digital textbooks, as opposed to 70 to 75% in the United States. A Japanese survey asked about the barriers to introducing ICT tools at universities. The responses were 95% of the respondents' universities reported to this survey. There was a lack of staff for creating digital content. IT-related jobs are considered 3K, meaning they're tough, you're not able to go home, and they offer a low salary. So they're not very popular. Traditional seniority system also interfered in this process. A lack of staff for maintaining ICT systems, so only 49% of university have network help desks for the faculty. Insufficient ICT skills for both academic and general staff, and a limited budget. More than 20% reported not having a support organization, not having a budget allocation, and not having support staff for online learning or ICT assisted learning. In summary, to quote several publications, Japan failed to understand that computers were becoming communication tools rather than computation tools. Also, the way ICT is used in classrooms is preventing Japan from seeing ICT tools as a communication device. And there is a widespread belief that prolonged usage of ICT will harm the human nature of students. Also, even though people have come to appreciate the benefits of ICT tools, they are still viewed as being in the same dimension as basic infrastructures such as electricity and telephone. Universities are in the best position to make breakthroughs in their role as academic institutions, creating new knowledge and developing human resources. Digital natives are entering the workforce. They look upon ICT tools as communication tools. They have lived in the cyber physical world their whole life and have no hesitation in using ICT tools. So we look to this generation for the future.
Okay, thank you very much for listening. We might have time for one question. Yes.
I'm just interested in the fact that much of the motivation being many national education policies to promote competition based on the idea the way forward is to be continuously competitive, producing consumer societies, and this is directly in the denial of the crisis, even though most scientists agree that that's what's happening. So what I'm curious about is how the education policy still always seems to lean towards promoting competition. And I think communication does involve cooperation. So part of the problem is the way in which the technology is being used. It's not really being used as a way of encouraging all people. And it's taken a pandemic to get into a situation like this where we can have conversations internationally at any time we like. So that's been an upside of the pandemic. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts about general directions for.
Yeah, I think Japan had a bit of a nervous crisis around the late 80s because they were worried about being left behind in terms of infrastructure. So it seems like they put a lot of emphasis on building the infrastructure, and which they succeeded in doing. But because there was such an emphasis on infrastructure, they tended not to pay attention to actually teaching the average citizen how to use systems and the benefits of the systems for the individual, as opposed to the larger country or corporations. So that's where one of the authors criticizes this idea that Japan still focuses on it as a sort of a utility, like electricity or gas or water, as opposed to a method for communicating, which I think is what you're talking about. This mindset of communication, the primary purpose, as opposed to it being a utility which allows corporations and whatnot to do that. So this seems to be an issue which Japan ran into. But again, as I ended, the new generation, the younger people, they see it quite differently, I think. They grew up using it as a communication tool. So I think we'll see that attitude change soon with the next, as this generation moves into the workforce, because they know it as a communication tool. So I think we're going to see a shift to that aspect. Of course, both aspects are important, but that's one thing.
I really like your approach, because I think perennially the great hope for the future is in the young. And I think you're right. I think they are seeing it as a device for community and cooperation.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think it's time now for our second speaker. So our second speaker is Professor John Blake from the Center of Language Research here at ISA University. And his title is Learner Created Digital Artifacts, Rapid Production and Incremental Improvement. So I'll let John take over.
Okay, can I share screen now?
Yes.
Let me master that. Where's my share screen? I'm not a host, right?
Debo?
Yeah. Well, it should not be a problem. You should be able to share the screen. Permission is granted to everyone, all the participants.
Okay. I got it.
There's a green,
Yeah,
there's
got
a
it.
green button at the bottom.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to people who I don't recognize. So Martens as one, people I do recognize, John Bryan, hi there. Okay, and everybody else. Is a little bit different. It's a much more practical. We had a great historical overview and contextual framework from where we are. What I'm trying to do is to address one of the many problems, and that's the staff for creating digital content. My approach is try to get the students to do as much as possible. So that's where the whole idea comes from. So learner created digital artifacts mean getting the students to be on task, learn something, create materials to help other people learn. Okay, so that's the key focus. So I'm going to do rapid production, basically getting them to make it and put it out and online quickly. And then because you put it on quickly, it's a quick and dirty version and it needs to be improved. So little by little, improving the first versions. Okay. So let me give you kind of the overview. This is the abstract, focus on the blue parts. So we're talking about creating tailor-made materials. Many of them start off as text-based and then move to image or movies. Materials take considerable time. When you have one tutor making materials for 50 students, there's obviously kind of a huge limitation. But when you're students making materials for one class, then you've got a lot of materials production. So obviously a problem there is the quality of it. So what I want to do is talk about to optimize the production of these digital artifacts, digital materials, and make the most efficient. To me, there are three advantages. One, rather than one making for many, you have many making for one. And that's the biggest advantage. It's a huge time advantage. Second one is providing you can focus the learners on what the real purpose is. Okay, and the real purpose almost always is helping other students learn. But in fact, while they create the materials, they themselves learn because they have to analyze, to evaluate, to actually make the materials. And that process of learning is like, it's the teach to learn model. By teaching somebody else, you learn. But the teach to learn model based on one-to-one or one group live interaction. This is a teach to learn model asynchronously because they teach by creating a material that helps somebody else learn. So the key things I want to talk about are the importance of product specification, which is not the words you use with the student. So the student is assessment, assignments, okay? But if essentially, the clearer the outcome is, the more likely the students are going to create something that matches what you want, okay? And of course, sometimes it doesn't work exactly, so it needs to be improved, hence the incremental improvements. So the key focus here is getting students to create digital artifacts that can be reused, repurposed, and revamped. Okay, so things give you an introduction to where we are in my context. Okay, the background itself, the courses and the learners, then present the framework. Okay, the framework is not as detailed as Peter's. very practical overview of we need some pedagogic design, because if you have no pedagogy, you're just wasting your time. And then we need a place to put it, and that's the platform design. So the pedagogy and the platform. Then I'll give examples of the rapid production and how we can incrementally improve. And I'll finish with some takeaway tips in case you want to adopt a similar approach. Okay, so we all know students have smartphones and Wi-Fi access. Not all over the world, but particularly here in Japan, it's unusual to find a student who doesn't own a Wi-Fi, doesn't own a smartphone, and doesn't have access to Wi-Fi. As we all know, last year was a disaster in terms of travel and face-to-face communication because of Corona, and many of us had to go to online tuition. So whether that was forced by your institution or whether it was a personal choice for you, that varies with places. I liked online tuition, and it probably would be my personal choice anyway, but COVID, in terms of the courses I'm focused on a little more, so not off-the-shelf course that you can teach when you have to create materials that are related directly to whatever you're teaching. I'm going to focus on a hybrid platform, which for me is when you have a website used in conjunction with a password protected place. So the website can share materials with the whole world, whereas your learner management system is password protected environment for students, materials they don't share with the world. Okay, so for example, you get them to take a video, they have to share it with the whole world, but they share it with their peers. So you can put that in the password protected environment. They make a video and they want to share it with the world, and we can put that on the web. Okay, the courses, many of the courses start as text-based. Basically, I had sort of PDF versions of books and moved to the online courses. In terms of multimodality, I'm just going to talk the advantages. When you look at pictures, you don't have to read words. That's great if you've got poor eyes, but it's also great if your English is not so good. Okay, so if your students don't really want to read too much English, and you can show them some pictures or some videos, they will love that. It increases the engagement. Okay, students are more likely to click to watch a 10-second video than read a PDF. Okay, and you may find the same. If you want to learn how to do something, do you watch a 1-minute video on YouTube, or do you read the manual? Some of us may read manuals, I know, but maybe we're a little bit special. Okay, it increases engagement. Okay, they like to work with multimodal materials. And the last one is students expect online courses to be multimodal. They don't expect to go to a website and just read. They expect to see things, to interact with things, on things, and things work. So if we don't do that, you're going to fail to meet their expectations, and that's only got one result: disappointment, which doesn't work well for your course. Okay, so probably you all know where we are. So it's Isowaka Mats. Okay, it's cold, it's snowy, there's not much here. It's a small niche university, but it's a great place to be, and it's a great place for students. In terms of the courses I'm going to focus on, there are two types. One are language courses, where the pure aim is to improve language. And two are the content-focused courses. We use content to help the students learn language. Okay, so the two courses that I teach, one is focused on logic, applied logic, and one's focused on patterns. So I'm going to draw many of my examples from these courses. The learners here are all computer science majors or computer science engineering majors, predominantly Japanese, and maybe that's just my taste, but I have a feeling also a male. So the framework. So as I said before, components, the pedagogy, you've got to really think about exactly the way that you want to teach. And this comes down to your teaching philosophy. Now, your teaching philosophy may vary when you do it live or online, but you really need to know what your philosophy is. So I'm going to talk about philosophy first, and then from your teaching philosophy, you're going to have some core concepts that you're going to build into the teaching. So I want to highlight those. You really need to know those before you design your course. Then you think about the platform design. So I'm going to think from three perspectives: the student's perspective, which of course is the most important one; But then we have the teacher perspective and the developer. Now, it could be the developer makes something for other people, yeah? Or it could be that you are the developer for your course, or you are the teacher developer. But anyway, there's still things to think about. In terms of pedagogy design, teaching philosophy for me is about beliefs. And it's about your beliefs. My subject is language, so my beliefs of language, the learners themselves, and how learners learn. In my case, beliefs about language learning. So what I did, I spent a long time thinking about my teaching philosophy and then how it applies to online learning. The outcome were these 4 concepts. I wanted students to, the whole learning environment to be centered around the students. And I don't just mean this notional student-centered learning. I mean really getting them to work together on tasks. And I use a self-managed teams approach. This is from kind of the business side. Students form 4-man teams or bricks. Each team has a leader. Each person in the team has a job, and they rotate the roles. Sometimes if it's a small team for a short time, it may be one leader that runs the whole project on a weekly basis. Activity-based learning. Here, generally, students are doing something. They're not just reading a book and answering questions. They have some activity to do. Now, whether you call this task-based approach or activity or problem-based, it all depends on how you frame it. But essentially, they're working together. Scaffolding through peer support. So here, rather than me helping the students, which of course is what teachers are supposed to do, but one teacher helping 50 students is difficult. 4 students getting help from 1 student, and they work in 10 teams, now you've got a much better ratio of help. Now, the problem is which students can help which other students. And here, kind of ideally, we have this expert database. And if you have a coding problem, you go to X. If you have a language problem, you go to student Y. Okay, it's not quite as simple as that. But the whole idea is in their self-managed teams, they try to support each other. If there's no support within their team, then they go to another team, have like paired teams as well, so they can get a wider level of support. And if they can't help themselves in their team or their paired team, then they come to me, and then I kind of outsource it to another team who I know is competent in that area. So a lot of scaffolding, but among themselves. I remember a student telling me when I helped them with something, they understood it and then they forgot it. But when another student helped them, they understood it and they continue to remember it. So for me, kind of, I really want kind of the students to help each other. And it comes to the last one of autonomy. I don't want to help students learn something over a 7-week course and then go away and forget, okay? The most important thing is that the students can continue to and do it by themselves. So if they can be autonomous and don't need me, that's ideal scenario. So rather than using me, they can use other resources that are out there and available for them all the time. Okay, so this is just like one snapshot of beliefs about learning, okay? You can see there are 9 headings in yellow, and then there are some concepts in white connected to those, and some relate to those concepts. It needs to be updated, but what it basically shows is I've really thought about the way that I believe, okay? And if you know what you believe, then it's much easier for you to make this about the materials that you create. So I'm going to show that all the philosophy, just like one more snapshot. Okay. In terms of getting students to do stuff, I talked. So here we have in a class of 40 students, 10 teams, 4 students per team. Each team creates some project. It just makes it more exciting. Initially, there are the 10 things I want to be made, and then they choose ones that they want to do. There's a workflow on Trello where they can select the tasks. They communicate together in groups in Slack, so you create a channel for each team, and then they work together in there. Sometimes their task is related to coding, so they kind of can share code. Students that are more proficient tend to share with Git or GitHub or GitLab or whatever they use. And a lot of students who are a little bit less proficient will use a simple interface like CodePen. For the assessments, that's all in a password protected area, so we prefer everything to be open, but I understand why we don't want to share assignments with kind of like 4 or 5 person. About 90% level, so they're either a leader, a coach, a leader with a general, and the text shouldn't be there. I apologize for that. So here, the leader is the one who liaises with me. So in a team, the coder, linguist, and general factum do not talk to me. Okay, only the leader talks to me. So if they want to change the leader with themselves, that's fine, and then somebody else can come to talk to me, but only in that role. A lot of the times when we're working in teams like this, they're going to be creating a little bit of code. So you really need one person in there who's got some idea of how to create code. So that's the coder, communicate with me, and that's the linguist. Now, the fact that the linguist is not the leader is really interesting, because the person who's most able to communicate with me is not the one communicating with me. Okay. And then you have this third person who is general. Yeah, we don't really know what they do. Okay, let me move on. So the platform design. So from the student's perspective and the teachers, it should be accessible. Now, password free to lose it. If they can access it on the phone because it's mobile first, that's perfect. Then there's no use for nobody not checking anything. So accessibility is paramount. For me, appropriate is also important. I want to make sure that they achieve are all in alignment. It's a very nice course. They can see at the beginning of the class they're supposed to achieve objective 1, and at the end of the class they've created this content that relates directly to objective 1. It makes it very, very smooth. Attractive here is in the sense that if something looks ugly, the students are less likely to go back to it. So if you can create a website or a course within your LMS that looks nice, it's going to create a good first impression, positive feelings, and the students are going to be more inclined to return to it. In terms of teacher friendly, so for me, it's about linear. Okay, life is complex. Things are linear. If we put things in order, you start with activity 1, you go through to activity 10, and you do them in order. That's great. Now, of course, we can jump some activities. We can go 1, 3, 6, 8, 10, but we don't go 5, 2, 1, 10. So kind of I try to put in the order which is most likely to be used. Integrated, so teachers don't have to mess around with separate notes, separate answer books, links that are difficult to find. Everything's kind of in one place. It's all embedded. We can reveal on demand or click and go through to see the video. Just all simple to use. The most important one for me, however, is the last one, maintenance free. I want to make a system that I don't have to do anything with. So it's just there. Unless I decide to improve it, I don't have to worry about it. In terms of rapid production, procurement means getting the students to do the right thing. So you bring it really quickly, and the brief it has to be specific. The more specific, the easier it will be for you. You won't waste time communicating the same information multiple times to different groups. If the assessment criteria directly relate to what you want out of the final product, that's great. So if you want the students to make a 1-minute video, well, your assessment criteria should be video will be graded A if it's from 50 seconds to 70 seconds, and if the sound quality is audible. Just those 2 parameters will ensure that you get something that's audible and of the right length. In terms of tech, I don't want students to put personal details and personal information online. So I make sure it's anonymous unless they really want to share it. In that case, I need their permission for it. Make sure that the quality is okay for wherever we're putting it or whatever purpose it is. In terms of the purpose, when students create amazing material, that can be used as an exemplar. When they create okay material, that can be used as an activity for other students to build on and improve. Deployment, I like to put it up as fast as possible. So if they submit it on Friday, I want to put it online on the Monday so that the group can use it and refine over time. So let me show some examples. So here's one task. So they have to write something. They're actually drawing a network diagram. So rather than having all students do the same thing, I had 10 different tasks. Rather than having to assign each student to groups, okay, this was done by their student number, so the final digit of the student number. If it's a 1, they're writing about crow's feet. If it's a 5, it's World War I. Okay, so you have a very specific task. So before this, they've seen examples of what these causality networks are. So now they have to kind of create one. So those were the 10 topics. One student created this, which is about eczema. And you can see that they've colored it according to a type of cause. And they've linked the causes together. So this now provides an example for causality network. And then we can follow up from that. They can label the causality network. So they could label it with I don't know, kind of like sufficient cause, necessary cause, proximal, distal, root cause, intermediary cause. There are multiple ways to name each of the causes. You can give them a task to make a 30-second audio file to explain the network, the proximal and distal causes, or you could translate this and get them to create a valid argument. So here we kind of focus on the 5 valid arguments, and they have to kind of create one argument using this content. So what you have is the content works as a stimulus for another activity. There's a different one, very simple sentence. There are 7 colors in a rainbow, which you are critically true. However, there are lots of issues because color varies by language. Rainbow colors vary from, I think it was from 3 to 9, as far as I know. There may be more. So here the students examined that. They created an audio file. I selected 2 audio files, one in Japanese, one in English, put them online as soon as I received them. So then I can add an extra task on, listen to the opinion of these students. So then in 2021, I can use the same thing, and then I can actually kind of maybe add another question in there. What's your comment on that? Or I can kind of juggle it some other way to kind of maximize the materials. We've got the materials, so I want to kind of like milk the materials as good as possible. Here's another one. So COVID. Okay, this. So each student created 1 argument, and this is just the first 10 of 50 arguments. Okay, so here the important thing is the premises may be true or false. The argument may be valid or invalid. Conclusions can be deductive and therefore sound or unsound, or they may be inductive and could be cogent or uncogent. For each example, students can now decide, is it deductive or inductive? Is the conclusion cogent, uncogent, sound, unsound? And they can go through the premises, and they've got lots of discussion points. It's a huge bank of material. It's like 50 examples. There's no way I could come up with 50 examples. I mean, there's just not enough time to do it, but they did, and it's great. So incremental improvement. So the key part here is we can reuse things, okay, repurpose it and revamp it. And a key part of revamping for me is changing the style about that text. Then another student creates a video about that sound file. It's just kind of like improving it each time. Here's an example, another, this one has now been revamped, and it's now actually an assessment task. Okay. Takeaway tips. So for me, clarity. The more clear you are, the less time you're going to have to spend trying to wait from the first place. Step-by-step rubric makes it easy to monitor whether the students are on task and not. The piecemeal estimation. If you want students to make a video and they give you a video, it's not so good. Stuck, there's not much you get. They've made slides and an audio, and then the video based on those. You do something with. Maybe they made open communication task. If there's an easy way Brian, thank you. Sound quality, and for me, it's a kind of submissions. I think students rich text has more, and movies are the most difficult one to make. Okay, and I'm out of time. If you've got time for a question, please ask me. Thank you.
Okay.
A question?
Hi, John.
Yeah, just a quick one. Let's see, creating digital artifacts. Just a comment that I think that's a great idea, because what you're doing it's increasing the social awareness of the students about how such processes take place. I mean, we usually accept our technology in a kind of passive state of mind because we just don't know all the programming that's gone on in a mobile device or a software system we're using. But in this approach, I think it's quite good for people with a technical inclination and computer science students, because they're being asked to work. So they're also working very directly, considering the assumptions that go behind the design of particular digital artifacts.
Yep, thank you. And thank you again, because I think this whole digital artifact idea is your idea. I'm sure somebody else had it before you, but it was great. Thank you.
I don't think it originated with me. I just said it, that's all.
Thank
you.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I really like the way you stress that the students expect multimodal. I think that's really true, especially how they grew up. That's similar to my ideas of trying to measure what the students are actually doing in their real world life, and when it's compatible, bringing it into the classroom. Also, I like the way you assign jobs to the students. When you said they're working together, you give them clear assignments. I think that there's a lot of literature supporting that, and it makes it very clear to the student what they are supposed to be doing. So one question I have is quality control. Do you have any ideas on quality control, how we can maximize that?
At the moment, quality control is an issue. I'm the bottleneck. For example, I have 50 students who submit at least 50 items each class. So then over the course, we've got 14 down 50, got like 7 items to look at. If I teach 4 courses at the same time, I've now got nearly 2,800 items to look at. It's just a lot. I mean, kind of in terms of the volume, it's really difficult to manage. What I tend to do is for each assignment, I go through and find 3 or 4 good models. And the first 3 or 4 good models I have, I put in a separate folder, good model. And I find 3 or 4 models that can be worked on and repurposed, and I put them in another folder. Then I have a lot of assignments that I've not done anything yet, but I think it's going to be sourced. And once I can work out how to best sort that out, I will do. But quality control, I can do quality control, but I can't maximize it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. I think we'll move on to the next speaker. So, is that a question? Okay, next speaker will be William Martens and Ru Wang, applying adaptive recognition of the learner's vowel space to English pronunciation, learning by native speakers of Japanese.
May I make a comment before I start? I'd like to make about a point that our previous talker, our previous speaker today made. It's about, this is my segue into my presentation, which is also a comment on the previous paper. The comment is one of the points that Professor Blake makes a successful application is, well, your beliefs about the learner, your beliefs about learning, your beliefs. It's all about the beliefs that are driving what we're doing that often are unexamined and in fact end up, if you don't mind my use of the colloquial expression, they end up biting us in the ass, the way I put it. So forgive my English, as we say. The fact is that I take some pride in being able to present the next presentation here for an audience hosted by the University of Aizu, because my work started there over 20 years ago in this area. And the emphasis of the talk that I'll be giving today is actually directly aligned with some of the points that Professor Blake was making about how important it is to know the learner and not to be killed off by the assumptions that we make that end up killing otherwise good intentioned applications. So I still have minutes before I have to start, but I will no doubt benefit from the extra 5 minutes. So maybe I should just go ahead and share my screen with you now.
Okay, that's fine if you're ready to present. Yeah.
So let me share the screen first.
We can have a
Oh.
little extra question time at the end for you.
John, you
I
can
do
take
have to
down your
inform
screen,
you.
please.
I do have to cannot start already sharing this talker.
John, can you disable your share screen?
Yeah.
Oh, next message.
Oh, he locked me out.
Yeah.
A demo at any time. Just
Okay. I'm another try.
John, you will need to
No.
stop sharing, please.
Still have-
Hey, I can do that.
I promise what I'll say is not so controversial and not critical of what you said. So please do allow me to make the presentation.
Yeah.
I'm still viewing John Lake's screen here.
I know.
It's a very nice picture.
It is. I love that screen.
Okay,
Oh,
that
oh,
looks like it
oh,
worked.
Oh,
Okay,
yes,
well, we used
have-
some of our extra time, so
That's okay. I'm happy now. Can everyone see that all right?
yes.
You've already read the title for me, so thank you. I'll simply proceed to give the presentation now. The first thing I'd like to point out is there are two authors for this paper today. Although I'm presenting it and I have the long history with ISU that sort of legitimizes my talking about what goes on in the CLR at ISU University, at the University of ISU. I also should emphasize that I've been working most recently with Wang. I know it's hard to imagine that RUI is pronounced Ray, but it is. It's Wang. And she's at Deakin University, not at the University of Sydney, which means the development of all the work together has been entirely via teleconferencing like this, via Zoom, and so on and so forth. So we have to actually do all the development via Zoom-based interactions. And I will simply launch from there into what I'd like to talk about today. And in advance, one more apology before I begin. There's quite a bit of technical material in this presentation that might make it less accessible for some of the audience, because there's a lot of what you would call acoustic phonetics, which is a technical subject that, my co-author, Ray Wang, has just shown her face now from Deakin University, which is not in Sydney. It's all the way down in an area south of Sydney, Australia, Melbourne, which has been isolated from the state of New South Wales, where University of Sydney is. So we're not even allowed to visit each other, according to the restrictions due to the COVID pandemic. So let me go ahead and proceed. Thanks for joining us today, Ray. And here's what I'm doing today. I'm talking about computer-assisted language learning, or CAL we've all used today, and other conferences. It's an environment for teaching English as a second language. But the ideas underlying the studies that I'm going to present today had their origin in my work with Japanese students at the University of Aizu during my time there, which 7 years of employment from 1997 to 2003. Now, during that time, I worked a lot with my colleague, Stephen Lombacher. Great deal of experimental work on pronunciation training was done in the CAL environment, the CALL environment, at the University of Aizu's Center for Language Research. In fact, you can see at the bottom of the page here, I've cited one of Steve's earlier papers. It's all about improving language acquisition of English. That paper is particularly focused on consonants, and I'm not going to talk so much about consonants today. In fact, we did focus a lot on identification training as a means of improving proper American English pronunciation. Throughout this talk. We emphasized mostly the production of isolated consonants and vowels, but sometimes in word construct like CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant, syllables. So the first thing I should say is, even though I'm not going to talk so much about identification, training, and production today when I talk about the call environment that's under development, but I should tell you the basis of some of the ideas that we're working with came from this early work. Our study showed that training L2 learners to identify American English vowels can have a strong positive effect on L2 production pronunciation. And this was confirmed through blind evaluation of the L2 productions by native American English speakers. So that was in a paper that's about the paper we reported back in 2005. We reported results demonstrating the effectiveness of high variability identification training. And this high variability refers to how much variability there is in the talkers, the American English speakers who are producing the sounds that the native Japanese L2 learners were asked to identify. In that study that we did back in early 2000, we're talking mostly about 5 particularly problematic American English mid and low vowels. So in that study, those 5 values were presented in a CVC context surrounded by the consonants B and D as shown in the next slide. So we're talking about these 5 words: bad, bod, bud, bawd, bird. Now, if you consider the difficulty faced by native Japanese speakers when they attempt to produce these 5 words, one of the biggest problems you might not expect at the face of it, but I'm going to really emphasize and harp on, go on length about today, is that the talkers that these Japanese L2 learners are listening to might have entirely different vocal tract lengths. That means they're bigger people, they have longer vocal tracts, and therefore their pronunciation will be in an entirely different acoustic phonetic space than those of the learner. This is a problem that I think needs to be ameliorated by the appropriate use of technology, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I will emphasize that there's something interesting in that 2005 paper about the variation in sensitivity versus the biases in reporting that we observed. I won't go into too much detail about it, but I will show you where the problems occur. Versus bias reveal the nature of the difficulty around identifying and producing words such as bud versus bod. So can you guess, or do you already know what the difficulty is here? The problem for Japanese EFL students comes when the vowel space of the speaker that they're listening to is grossly mismatched with their own vowel space. So how much variability do we expect to see in the vowel spaces of these learners? Well, one obvious example would be a larger male, right? So you see very large differences between male and female learners. Female learners are at higher frequencies than these male learners are showing for the formants, making the distinctions or the phonetic contrasts or acoustic contrasts between the 5 sounds we know are typical in Japanese, like O that we hear so much. So there's where the female might be placing these same 5 vowel sounds in the format space described by F1 and F2, the first 2 formats or the first 2 resonances of their vocal tracts. Of course, a female having a shorter vocal tract, if she's a smaller person, will have higher format frequencies because shorter vocal tracts make for higher format frequencies. I'll give you an example of what it sounds like when you change these 5 vowel sounds, ha, he, hu, he, ho, for the listener to appreciate what happens when the talker's head is getting larger and larger. So here I'll start with a recording. That's the largest. Did you hear those okay? I assume that if you had heard them, you would have hadn't heard them, you would have told me. But what you heard that was me. All of those words were spoken by me, ha, he, hu, he, ho. However, you might have heard that my head was changing size while I was uttering it each time. Go back to my presentation. There we go. So what we did in that study back in 2005 was we used a high variability corpus of American English speakers, but they were all from the northern Midwestern region of the USA. Why is the exclamation point there? Because that's obviously a regional dialect of American English, right? The choice was to circumvent too strict influence of general American English that are often employed to our hypothesized detriment for the L2 learner. So here's where general American English supposedly comes from, but actually characterizing American English this way is it's not a very good idea, since there are at least regional dialects that are clearly distinct in the literature of acoustic phonetics. So clearly dialect matters, but wait, is there another parameter? There's another parameter that's most influential. I've already hinted about what it already gets, but compared to differences between the northern Midwestern dialect of American English and other regional dialects, such as the Northeast Coast and the Deep South, according to what difference between AEX speakers do we see an even greater variability in vowel space? It's of course the gender difference between male versus female. It's by far on the vowels. In fact, it's the speaker size parameter that underlies most of this variation, which is a factor that machine listening algorithms easily handle. That's going to be important because we want to be able to adapt to the vowel space of an L2 learner in a live online session. So we need to be automatically detect speaker size and adapt to it. Well, you might wonder, is this really important? Well, it's important because human listeners do. These differences, they're understanding some speech, and all of the vowel sounds that you hear in the context of someone talking after you've adapted to their vowel space, all those vowel sounds will be interpreted appropriately based on the vowel space that you've adapted to. So can listeners, absolutely, there's a paper in 2000 that I could refer you to. Those are high acute in discriminating speaker size for a large set of speech sounds. For example, they had a set of I'll bring them up on the screen. There's also they happen that are Japanese language with a number of different consonants, so on. These can be automatically detected by human listeners, but they were also synthesized in order to test the ability of those human listeners. Now I should really address this point and move on. How is human versus machine discrimination of speech size working? Well, despite the pronounced increase in stimulus variability for CV symbols, which is compared to when vowel sounds are heard alone, discrimination performance by human listeners for CVs was superior to that supported by vowels alone. Results support the hypothesis that information about the length of the vocal tract is segregated at an early stage in human auditory processing. Early stage means automatically, right away, all the time. Note that automatic speech recognition, or ASR machines, are notoriously bad at recognizing the speech of children when they're trained on the speech of an adult, but those ASR machines are very good at automatically recognizing the size of the speaker. they're actually particularly efficient at discriminating male from female speech. And so I've cited at the bottom for someone who wants to go and read more about this. There's a good review, 2006 paper by Turner et al., all focusing on this vowel normalization, which is another name for what I'm talking about. But now, where are we going with this? I've only got so much time today, and I want to get right down to the call environment that we're looking at and wondering what it should look like. Well, despite the current prevalence of video teleconferencing solutions such as Zoom, alternative technologies might provide advantages via augmented telepresence. For example, attractive applications featuring virtual reality or extended reality. So perhaps VR-based solutions have already become passé and you don't really want to hear about those, but the mass media have really prepared us for this kind of technological immersion, teleconferencing situations in which participants appear as floating heads, sometimes as ghostly, semi-transparent apparitions made possible via head-mounted projective displays or HMPDs over 20 years ago. And I do cite a paper at the bottom of this slide showing that Wang and I, along with Wang Hon, has been submitted for publication in Behavior and Information Technology, talking about this XR advanced language learning through vocal avatars, which I'm going to talk about more today. But first, let's look at what the technology looked like 20 years ago. Actually, Sensei and I both went to IEEE Virtuality back in 2001 in Yokohama, and we saw HMPDs like this one. Other presentations at that same conference had titles like this: Immersive Telecommunication Using Stereo Video Avatar. You can imagine what this is like. This is like having a projected face floating in front of you in space, but it's in three-dimensional relief. It's a stereographic effigy because it's a stereo video capture. And so this solid face appears translucent in front of you, and it's the person that you're talking to from some remote location. We're not necessarily talking about doing that, but we could. There's lots of products that do that now. Microsoft's HoloLens could do this easily. Here's an example that I pulled off Microsoft's website on the HoloLens. So what I'd like to talk about is a proposal for vocal avatars. So in contrast to the ghostly, semi-transparent XR apparitions that can be presented by HMPDs, the possibility of using animated 3D graphic avatars offer a really attractive alternative. Attractive is key here. We want students to really want to engage with this, don't we? So users can take pride in developing their own personality, perhaps culturally relevant and expressive of the learner's personality. And a level of humor might go a long way towards making participants more comfortable in shared virtual environments and might even facilitate learning experience interaction. So that's what I'm going to talk about. But strangely, I started working on this back in 1996 before I even arrived in IZU. There was an online 3D virtual world called OnLive Traveler for live chat. Back in the early 90s, it featured audio transmission of speech using an engine called Voxware. It was real-time multi-point voice for spoken telecommunication. And the really great feature of it was, for this 3D virtual world, was the real-time avatar would move its mouth and change its facial expressions as you spoke. Fairly advanced for its time, I think. We'd like to be able to do something like that today as a regular practice that everyone gets used to. We're not quite there yet, are we? But Online Traveler, back in the 90s, it exhibited graphic manipulation of the user's avatar via an automated process connecting that avatar to the user's audio input. And for a glimpse of what it looked like, I can refer you to this documentary video about Avatara that was produced back in 2003. Now here's what it looked like. I'll just take a screenshot. This is from the 90s. And I was in the position of arranging to be a developer using their engine. And I was somewhat daunted by the fact that you have to pay $100,000 US dollars upfront to use this engine. And Intel, you'll be interested to know, paid to keep this technology off of the 486, which was the old technology of that year. They wanted to be sure that users would need to buy the Pentium or 586 processor-based PC to be able to run Traveler. Here's what another screen looked like. What you had in 96 was users customly selected a voice modification that matched the appearance of their avatar. So you have small rabbits that sounded like small rabbits and big dogs that sounded bigger. And so now I'm going to give you another audio example so you can hear what this voice modification might have sounded like. Again, it's my voice, but modified either to become smaller like a rabbit or bigger like a big dog.
Small rabbits should sound small, and big dogs should sound bigger. Small rabbits should sound small, and big dogs should sound bigger.
Small rabbits should sound small, and big dogs should sound bigger. Small rabbits should sound small, and big dogs should sound bigger.
Yes, that's me. I'm sounding bigger. Now, the point is, and I'm going to get to it now so you can see why I'm making these points. Here is a possible, I've actually adapted a graphic that co-author Wang used in the paper that we just submitted, but I've changed the avatars to indicate either a big dog or a smaller rabbit for the instructor's avatar. I guess you can see my mouse, and the learner's avatar. And the point is, if you want to sound like you have roughly the same vocal tract length or the same vowel space as the learner, you need to make yourself smaller. So I've turned myself into a chipmunk to match the size of the rabbit. What enables this is the voice print collection for the learner, which is featured in the lower right here. And then with the appropriate voice transformation, I can make my voice match the vowel space of the learner, therefore provide better examples of what their target sounds might be like to have proper pronunciation of American English, however, in a way that is individualized to them, which respects their individual characteristics. I think you get the point, but maybe I need to say more.
Please notice that the pitch of my voice doesn't change, but please notice that the size of my head appears to be changing. Please notice that the pitch of my voice on average doesn't seem to be shifting, but the size of my head does seem to be getting larger and larger as I speak. Even now, my head is growing even larger, even though my pitch has not gotten much lower. In fact, my pitch is almost the same as when I started, but my head really seems to be getting quite large now, almost like a cave bear instead of the chipmunk or rabbit that you heard when I started pronouncing these words.
So I think you get the point that we can easily move, if you like, the simple slider on the screen, if that's what's appropriate, or base the voice transformation on detected vowel space of the learner. So that's what I've demonstrated here. I hope you get the point of that demonstration. So moving on, what I want to talk about then is how you can use this in a computer-assisted pronunciation training environment for native Japanese ESL learners. Again, I should direct you to simply read what I've written here because there's so many words. When native speakers of Japanese English as a second language, there are difficulties with their training and pronunciation of American English vowels that can be ameliorated through adaptive recognition of the learner's vowel space. They can be provided with customized target utterances of English language words that are synthesized according to an adaptive recognition of their vowel space. And case studies that I present today, customized target utterances were synthesized to give learners examples of each of 12 American English monophthongs in consonant-vowel-consonant context in order to sound as if they'd been uttered by the learners themselves. Now, one of the things I should say as an aside here, there's actually something lovely about this, which is it's a source of humor and delight for the learner to hear my voice suddenly sounding more like theirs. But in fact, I can take their voice and I can process it to shape the vowels using their own vocal tract parameters so that it sounds like they've said the things that I've just tried to train them in production. So this adaptive process, I can tell you in the case studies we've examined so far, achieved good results by giving more appropriate pronunciation targets to each learner rather than forcing the learners to attempt to match the formant frequencies of their own utterances to those of target utterances as produced by a talker exhibiting a different vowel space. In other words, a talker with a different vocal tract length. So now on this slide, I show you some of the examples of some of the learners that we've had in this space. On the left side of the screen, we have the single Japanese vowel spaces, one male, those are the black triangles on the left there, and then the circles are one female, and you can see that the female is generally exhibiting higher formant frequencies than the male was. But now look at this is a comparison plot in English vowel spaces, but this is not individuals. This is the mean formant frequencies for 45 males and then 48 females. It comes from a classical source, Hillenbrand et al. So what you see is the 12 utterances that we hope to train the Japanese learners to produce, even though their vowel space doesn't quite match these mean vowel spaces. We can adjust the utterances which provide them with exemplars they should try to copy so that it's more appropriate and more comfortable for them. Now I really have to return to a point that I was stimulated to address by a talk I heard yesterday by Ho and Saito on promoting English speaking confidence through online expanding circle communication. It's all about their investigation promoting English speaking confidence, because we don't want to attack the confidence of our L2 learners. And the take-home message of that presentation yesterday, all environments, is to attempt to make Japanese ESL learners more comfortable with their own pronunciation of English. But this seems to be at odds with an emphasis on proper AE pronunciation, and indeed in many contexts where the training is not customized to the individual and not adapted to the individual's vowel space, it is in truth quite uncomfortable for them to try to produce these targets. So the second paper from yesterday that I have to mention now is because it makes the point of why we want to train American English pronunciation. In that paper yesterday by Ho on developing EFL learners' communicative competence, the emphasis was on competence, not for its own sake, but for promoting improvement in communication on particular tasks within particular contexts. So in an attempt to make my point concrete here, the next slide presents an example of typical pronunciation difficulties that can be predicted in conversational contexts via the following scenario, which I call the Ipod problem. Now here's the problem. Of course, if you know how native Japanese speakers typically pronounce these two words, I've spelled them out in the katakana here. There's the, in kana here. And the iPodo is the pronunciation for what in English I would call the iPod. And then here, iPod. Well, iPad really should rhyme with bat, and iPod should rhyme more with pot. And yet it doesn't. It rhymes more with boat when produced in the conventional way that a Japanese native speaker would pronounce it based on how it's read. This is a diagram that was shown to participants online while explaining the mismatch between pronunciation in Japanese and English for these consumer products. And it illustrates potential confusions for the Japanese L2 learner, which we propose CAPT provides a solution: computer-aided pronunciation training. Now, another question I want to address just before finishing is, good question, should we be teaching articulation in tongue space I wonder about this. It's a very common practice, especially within the International Phonetic Association, to promote this physiological fantasy. But you can see, you can try to teach that this is a high front vowel sound in the word beat, and then we move down to bay and down lower to pot, and then we move up the other side to the back to boat and boot. Now, this is all right for showing the lay of the land to the students, only because you can show where the American English vowels fit in this space. For example, bat fits somewhere between bait and pot, and the word bought fits somewhere between pot and boat. And there is regular variation in the formant frequencies of Japanese vowel sounds for an individual. Here's some from a paper in '84 where they analyzed a lot of individuals to show that their vowel space includes lots of variation in these formant frequencies that they're using to produce these 5 different vowel sounds in Japanese language, just through normal conversational variation, right? And I'm applying it sort of upside down and backwards the way we do in the phonetics literature, as I did in the previous slide. So the interesting thing about the 2 American English vowel sounds that I introduced in the previous slide, they fit nicely into the gaps. They fill the gaps in between a and ah. You have the ah of bat, and between the ah and o, there's a gap where you can fit the ah. It makes it a little bit easier to direct the attention of the learners towards how to make these sounds so that they can make the distinctions that they want to make in properly communicating. Again, it's not pronunciation for its own sake as an ideal that they should attain. No, it's serving communicative clarity that we want to aim for. So now I'll get to my conclusions because I only have 4 minutes left before the end of my talk. What are we doing here? We're promoting a method for computer-aided pronunciation training through which Japanese ESL learners can be provided with customized target utterances synthesized according to an adaptive recognition of the learner's vowel space. And I hope that these bullet points are clear enough now, given the presentation that I've made of this. These are my bullet points. An automatic generation of those target utterances was accomplished through characterization of each learner's vowel space, so that the formant frequencies used in synthesis of the utterances could be selected to conform appropriately to the formant frequencies that were calculated for 5 Japanese vowel sounds produced by the learners. And I did that by making my big dog American English into that of a chipmunk. That chipmunk is not in the dog's mouth. Not in the mouth. Don't be afraid. The dog's not eating the chipmunk. There, dog's gone. Okay, so this approach respects an ILTRU learner's individuality by not expecting them produce American English words with pronunciation that matches that of recorded words produced by American English talkers who exhibit vowel spaces that differ greatly from that of the learner. We aim to respect the L2 learner's individuality in this in a number of ways. It's in the hope of developing an online environment to further support appropriate training, right, as suggested by the following quotation, which I have taken from the presentation yesterday by Professor Saito. He made this point. This is a declaration to his students. Stop mimicking standard English. Speak your own English with your own culture and identity. And I want to respect to this point that that is what we want to do. The only reason to teach clear pronunciation of American English is to teach acoustic contrasts that are very useful in communicating what the L2 learner wants to communicate. For example, I gave the example of iPod versus iPad, which is typically confused when an English speaker, even an international speaker, hears iPod and iPod. They could easily get confused by what they're hearing, right? I think you get my point. Maybe I said enough, but I do want to say, and we'll show more detail in the paper at this point. I don't have time to go into it, so I'm just going to conclude. The analysis of 9 case studies showed that normalizing the vowel space used in synthesizing English words in CVC form could provide Japanese learners with a more comfortable and ultimately more effective learning experience for appropriate training of American English pronunciation. And that is indeed the presentation for today. And I'm take questions now if we still have a few moments. Or if you want, you can via email. Yes, John.
Yes, quick question. If a learner doesn't have to adapt to a wider vowel space, can this approach provide a basis for later adaptation to a wider vowel space? I mean, is there any evidence that once they've constricted their vowel space that this will actually speed up their learning so that they can then generalize to this more natural, diverse vowel space?
Well, I want to address the question you've asked with some understanding of the distinction that you've made between a wide space versus a constricted space. You mean the extent of variation in the formants, making the vowel space smaller? Is that what you mean by constricted, or just the wide variability? Which did you mean?
I mean
properly.
Any ability if there's constriction for learning, what are the operational sort of effects in then being able to adapt to natural English where there's all sorts of, where you can't sort of limit what you're hearing? I mean, there's probably, there may be, and I'm just interested if you're thinking of looking at that or if you know something about that. Just curious.
I do know something about it. Unfortunately, I only know half the story. I only have half an answer. The first half of the answer is about their ability to listen to a wide variety of talkers who have different vowel space, different size, different dialect, and so forth. And certainly this identification training that we do can help them in those contexts. What I can't tell you is in their production of their own pronunciation of English language, I don't have enough data on that yet. All I know is that the identification training that we've given them has made it possible for them to produce utterances that a blind panel of American English native speakers will correctly identify what their intended production was. Did they intend to produce the awe of bought, which is not something easy for the Japanese speakers. In fact, they don't really, just bud versus bod, very difficult because it all assimilates to ah, because that's where the vowel sound is in Japanese that corresponds to the both of those. So that's what we call the assimilation. But by this training, they learn to not just to discriminate what they hear in the context of bud versus bod, but they also learn to produce the differences. And I think that it is a sort of a double-edged sword. And I think I'd like to believe, and I don't have the evidence for you yet, but I'd like to believe that if we go in sort of iterate on this identification, then production, identification, production, we're going to show great benefits in both domains. I think it's a great question, and it is something that, addressing Ray Wang now, Ray, we should probably do studies that focus precisely on this iterative refinement of the practical use case of pronunciation and understanding of English language across all its dialects. I mean, you probably understand, John, what it's like for an American English native speaker like I am living in Australia, because Australian English is so different from American English that sometimes it's difficult for me. I won't get too personal about this, but when my daughter in year 3 was put into the Sydney school systems, they put her into ESL because she couldn't understand what they were saying. And so she became an ESL student, even though as far as written English was concerned, I take pride in saying my daughter was actually off the scale. I mean, she was very good in English. However, she couldn't understand Australian pronunciation of English. Took her some time. Now she speaks Aussigo pretty well.
Well, the northern Midwestern English is it's almost Ontario Canadian.
Almost. In fact,
Yeah.
where she was before we took her to Sydney, Australia, which she was in Montreal, living amongst the bilinguals. That's again an interesting growing up experience. I mentioned that yesterday when it's not important, but the fact is growing up bilingual or even trilingual is a great advantage in this area. And I don't know, perhaps Ray Wang will be interested to comment on this as well, because she's a native speaker of Chinese, and she's working on this project with me in hopes of providing these sorts of training environments for Japanese learners of English as well. And maybe just academic purposes is the primary target, but we really want the learners to be conversationally comfortable as well.
I'm definitely very much into this domain, and also my daughter will be growing up in an environment that's bilingual, and like how she will identify herself both culturally and like in I think the language. That's fascinating topic for me.
Yeah, it is for me too. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I noticed that we've gone over time a little bit, and we're actually eating into the 10-minute break that we should be taking. And so I apologize for not minding the time more carefully, but Peter, that is your job. You should probably
That's
stop.
my job, so I apologize. I take full responsibility. So.
Okay, well.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very interesting. Okay, so I guess at 11:25, we'll start the keynote speech from Professor Campos. So I think, Debo, what do you think? We should take a 4-minute break, or?
Yeah, we can take a 5 minutes break and then get started probably, if that's okay with everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. It was an honor to be able to present here. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay, so we'll return at 11:25, 5 minutes.
And should I say Viva Aizu? There's my Aizu Daigaku no. I do go back to Aizu every year practically. I got this there just 2 years ago. Anyways, take a break. Hey, there's really
it's all
Hello,
important.
Cheers. Okay.
And if you could stop sharing your screen.
I will.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
That has been done. I am no longer bowering other entries.
Thank you.
Into the shared space. And I will hide myself and lurk for a while.
Okay, me too.
Perhaps I can give you a foot rub tonight. to focus on your beautiful new toes. And pay attention to your beautifully pedicured toes! Exclamation mark.
Professor Campos?
Yes, hello.
Hi. Hi. We're just taking a short break and then we'll start in a minute.
Sure, no problem. Is it okay if I leave the screen share? It's fine?
Oh, yes, please. Yes.
Okay.
How is the weather in Mexico?
Well, right now we are, I would say it's cold for us, but it's not that cold for everyone else. So no, last week has been like a really nice, I guess like around 20, 25
wow.
Celsius degrees. Yeah.
So better than here.
Yeah, way better than I assume.
Tell you what it's like in Sydney, Australia, it's almost 40 degrees.
Yeah,
wow.
I guess.
Very hot.
I'm so jealous.
I'm gonna strip down to my t-shirt now that I'm done with my presentation. After. Too hot.
You're making me sad. Okay, shall we start?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the keynote speech, Professor Campos from University of Monterrey, Mexico, Biomechanics in Rehabilitation. Okay, and anytime you're ready.
Thank you so much, Peter. So, first of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, talking to you from the past. We're still in January 27, so it's quite interesting that we have this opportunity to connect and talk and share our work. So, something is. Can you see my screen? No.
Yes, I can.
I think I had an issue with the PowerPoint presentation. Just give me 1 second. Okay, there you go. So yeah, you can hear my kid on the back playing, running all around the house. So I apologize for that. So yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here sharing with you a little bit of our work, which is a little bit different from what you have been talking about. But I hope it's interesting and you found it or you have a good time hearing a little bit about this. So what I would like to present to you is how biomechanics can be helpful when we want to develop or apply knowledge in rehabilitation engineering. So I would like to start saying or talking to you about what is biomechanics. So basically biomechanics is defined as the interdisciplinary field that describes, analyzes, and evaluates human movement. So anything related to human movement, biomechanics enters in there, right? So who is interested in human movement? Well, there are many professions and professionals that are interested in this, such as orthopedic surgeons, sports trainers, rehabilitation engineers, kinesiologists, orthotists, prosthetists, designers, especially those that are doing sports equipment or apparel. So basically, there are plenty of people which are interested on the knowledge that someone can acquire from biomechanics. So there are 4 fields that could be identified where biomechanics can be applied. I'm going to be talking a little bit about 3 of them, mostly on the clinical one, but just for you to, or to be on the same page, sports biomechanics, which basically is looking to improve performance and to design, especially apparel and equipment. We also have occupational biomechanics, which is mostly focused on ergonomics, which are the best postures of the body, especially when working, on the occupation. Clinical biomechanics, which is any disorder related to movement. So any disease which has motor symptoms can be somehow analyzed and evaluated from the biomechanical perspective. And also the one that I won't be talking about it, but just to mention it, it's forensic biomechanics, which basically it's more looking into body injury assessment. So after an accident, just to evaluate if an injury was a consequence of that accident or it was a consequence of something else. So similarities between the 4 of them. Basically, it's there is quantification. And this quantification is preceded by a biomechanical analysis. So there is some research going on back in there. So just a couple of examples of how research can be applied on these fields. I'm going to start with the sports biomechanics. So early in the 900s, there were plenty people doing some analysis of different athletes and sports, such as here they're doing a well, it's an article or a paper or work published on the Journal of Applied Physiology, where they're evaluating athletes' performance. In this case, runners, right? So it's something that has been done since a lot of time ago, and also, well, as you know, and as we just mentioned, I'm from Mexico. We Mexicans love soccer. And for anyone who loves about or knows a little bit about soccer, nowadays there is this competition between these 2 monsters in soccer, which is Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, right? It's kind of like the $1 million question, which is the best soccer player nowadays and in history. And I don't want to really go into details and into the discussion. Of course, it's Messi. So, but we cannot deny that what Cristiano Ronaldo does is amazing. So it's something out of this world, right? So I'm just showing you a little video. It's not, if you want to look through this documental like completely, you can find it in YouTube, but it's just kind of like a thriller of this study that was done when Cristiano Ronaldo was playing in Madrid, which is quite interesting because you can see the different approaches and the different things you can evaluate from again, a biomechanical perspective.
What gives him the strength? What gives him the power? What gives him the mindset, the quickness of his eyes, the quickness of his decision making? What makes him that good?
This is Cristiano Ronaldo.
So it's quite interesting because, as I told you, there are some findings that even Cristiano Ronaldo was like a really amazing surprise, such as he has more muscular mass on the left side of the body than in the right side of the body, and he used to play with the use more like the right foot. So it was quite interesting that the findings. So if someone is really into soccer, I recommend you to watch this video. And also, when we talk about sports biomechanics, we have, as I said, design. Something like really common where there is some biomechanical analysis before bringing this product in the market is the shoes. So every year we see Nike, Puma, Under Armour, and these big companies bringing new shoes, right? And of course there may be some marketing behind this, but also there is a biomechanical reason behind. And basically they are looking for two things. One, how can we improve performance? And two, help sports or help athletes not to have any injuries and prevent athletes from having injuries. So this is kind of like a big scope of how biomechanics can somehow be used in sports. The next one is occupational biomechanics. As I said, it's more kind of like the ergonomics. What are the best postures in the occupation? So here I can share with you a couple of studies that I somehow participated, because it's they were done in the lab where I used to work when I was doing my master and my PhD. And here some colleagues, some peers were looking into the effect of walking while typing on neck and shoulder patterns. So two main findings on this one. So first, to give some variability of movements brings so many benefits to the body. And with variability of movements, I mean, and this, it's more, it kind of like gets more important nowadays that we are working from, or many of us are working from our home and in our desk, and we don't move from our office in like for 8 to 12 hours, whatever is our day work. But just like even small movements, such as, you know, putting one foot on top of a stool, then bringing that foot down, then put it to the next one, then both of them. Those little things, they bring so many benefits in a large time to the body. And also another finding related to variability of movements is that if we implement walk stations in our offices, also there are some benefits to the body, to the human body, preventing on developing musculoskeletal diseases or disorders. So this is one of the main findings of these papers. Another one also related to variability of movements. In our lab, we look into what are the difference of using a single computer workstation versus a multiple computer workstations. And we found that even with these slight movements of our neck, just to switch from one screen to the other, there are also some benefits to our body. And now, well, that's a little bit about the occupational. As I said, I would really like to focus on clinical forensic, just the intro that I gave you. And for the clinical biomechanics, which is kind of related to what I really want to focus on, how biomechanics is applied to rehabilitation engineering, I would like to start saying, what is rehabilitation engineering? So basically, it's the application of the science and technology to solve problems faced by individuals with disabilities. And basically, these problems, or most of these problems, are solved with the development of assistive technology. And this assistive technology, most of them somehow are done using one of these emerging technologies of the new or the so-called fourth revolution in the industry, which are the big cloud, robotics, simulation, 3D printing, Internet of Things, big data, advanced materials, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. And now, kind of like bringing back to clinical biomechanics, I would like to share to you the project that I did for my PhD, which is related to Parkinson disease. So this project was done in at McGill University in the Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. I was kind of like, you know, bringing back memories when previously someone mentioned about Montreal and the bilingual culture in there. So I spent 6 years of my life living in Montreal. So somehow used to snow and cold weathers. It's a hard for a Mexican, but I survived, so I'm proud of myself. And especially I work in the Occupational Biomechanics and Ergonomics Lab, which is now known as the Biomechanics of Occupation and Sports Laboratory, which is found in the Jewish Rehabilitation Hospital, Laval. Laval is just a city across the river north of Montreal. So why did we choose Parkinson? Basically because the 4 cardinal symptoms are motor related. So what are those motor symptoms? Bradykinesia, rigidity, tremor, and postural instability. So what is Parkinson? Parkinson, it's declared as a degenerative neurological disease characterized by motor symptoms, as I just said. It's known that the cause of Parkinson is the degeneration and death of the dopaminergic cells in the substantia nigra. And this substantia nigra is part of the basal ganglia circuits, which are affected and are the ones responsible for automatic movements. So I'm going to show to you a video that really kind of like impact me somehow, and maybe it's one of the main reasons I decided to go to work with Parkinson, which is a clear example of how freezing, a motor symptom known in some individuals with Parkinson's disease, how freezing affects their life. So this video is not, it's a video that you can find online. We can see a patient with severe symptoms of Parkinson. We can see some tremor on their hands, asking him to walk through the hall. They are giving him some reference, you know, when the professional, the health professional is putting the foot in front of him, is kind of like giving a visual reference on where he has to step, where he has to move. And we can see that he's having a lot of issues to go through the hall, to walk, and somehow also when he's asked to turn, he's in fact we can see like the tremor is more severe and he's having like heart issues. So they bring the same patient outside to bike, and this is something that really impacted me. Like, I would like you to see what is the performance of the same patient the same day when walking and when biking. So he's biking as anyone else without any issue. He turns, he goes back to the initial point, and I would like you to see how he gets off the bike when he reaches the final point. So he jumps off the bike, then he's asked to move forward and to walk, and he starts again having these issues. So it's quite interesting to see how when they're in 2 different scenarios, they perform really different, right? Same persons. So what is freezing? Freezing is one of the most disabling symptoms in Parkinson's disease. It is known as an interruption of normal movement execution in patients with Parkinson's disease, which is related to abnormal coordination. And it's mostly seen in gait, but also has been documented during speech and upper limb movement. So before kind of like starting my study and doing the protocol, I started asking myself, okay, so it seems that there is this motor symptom that is affecting some people, not all of them. That's something really important to say. Not all people with Parkinson's disease develop freezing. And it seems that it might be something that is affecting in a general way the body, because it has also been documented in speech, during upper limb movements. So I started looking to similarities and differences between freezing of gait, so when they freeze when they're walking, and freezing of upper limb when they're doing an arm task. So some similarities, before they freeze, there is a decrease in the step length or in the movement, and also an increased frequency. So they start working with short steps and they increase the frequency of the short steps. Something similar when they're doing an arm task. And also when you impose like small amplitude conditions, freezing episodes are triggered. So those are some of the similarities that we found in the literature, but also there were some differences. Which are the differences that we found? So freezing of gait, so when they're walking, seems to be bilateral. Both limbs are froze. And freezing of upper limb, sometimes it's reported unilateral, only on one side of the body. And when we talk about medication in Parkinson's disease, freezing of gait or the episodes of freezing of gait are reduced when using levodopa, which is the regular treatment or regular medication. But for upper limb, there is no response. It seems that there is no effect on reducing freezing of upper limb. So when we see this table, we are talking about two different symptoms, two different things happening in the body. So there are so many things. I don't really want to go into details, but there are so many things about what can explain these differences. Some of when you're walking, you're also aware of some other stuff, such as postural stability. When you're doing an arm task, maybe you are not kind of like aware of that because you're sitting or because you don't have to be worried about falling, right? Also, some of the people that report there are no levodopa, they were talking, or the arm task that they were doing, it was like a finger tapping task. And a finger tapping task is known to be like a really fine movement. So to control a fine movement is harder than to control some other movements of the body. So there are so many things that can explain these differences. But what we found in the literature is that freezing of gait rules, everything is based on the freezing episodes on lower limb. So what I mean with everything is based on that. If you are doing a study where you're gonna have people with Parkinson's disease who experience freezing and people with Parkinson's disease who do not experience freezing, the way to kind of like select or divide in those two groups, it's by a questionnaire which is based on their experience on walking. So what if there are two different symptoms? Like we cannot be using a tool to identify freezing that is based on walking when we want to analyze freezing of upper limb. So we started questioning ourselves, what if both of them are different? And also what if freezing of upper limb does not exist? It's something that it's a combination of different symptoms or different things that are going on in the body. So what was the objective of our study? To obtain a better understanding of the control mechanisms triggering freezing on upper limb and lower limb in individuals with Parkinson's disease. So we have three groups. So we have, as I said, some people develop freezing, some others they do not develop freezing. So we have a freezers group, a non-freezers group, and a healthy control group. And we tested 2 sessions. Why we tested 2 sessions? Because we really wanted to see what was the effect of medications. As we saw in the table, it seems that freezing of upper limb, there is no response to levodopa. So we really wanted to see what's going on. If it's something that is going to replicate in our study, or we're going to find same thing. So what was our session, or every session consisted on 3 sections. The first one, clinical evaluations. So we run 5 different clinical evaluations, medical history questionnaire, freezing of question 1, the MOCA, the most known as the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. We evaluated cognitive abilities. HON and JAR and the UPDRS, the 2 last ones, are 2 clinical tools to evaluate how severe are the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Session as instrumentation. So just kind of like to explain what can we look when we are doing a biomechanical analysis. We can look especially to 3 different variables: movement, kinematics, forces that are applying or are somehow affecting the body, which is kinetics, and muscle activity. We use EMG for that. So basically our instrumentation consisted on putting 40 markers that we can track with a motion tracking system to identify 16 muscles in the upper and lower limbs, and to use some 2 force plates that measure the center of pressure, the forces that are acting under the feet of our patients. Tasks, the repetitive reaching task to evaluate freezing of upper limb, and a stepping in place task, which is a task that we previously used, and we found that it's a good one if we want to trigger freezing episodes in people with Parkinson's disease. That kind of replicates a gait task, and also it's easier for us to have a stepping in place task because we have kind of like some limitations when collecting, like the motion tracking system is, we have these 8 different cameras that we are pointing into like a same place. So we don't really have like a good space for people just to walk and evaluate when they're walking. So we decided to go with a stepping in place task. And we have different conditions. So basically, we have the reaching task, we have the stepping in place task. We evaluated each of the tasks when using the most important one, both of the limbs together. Also, we evaluated posture when they were sitting, when they were standing. Basically, the theory behind evaluating posture is that there is a theory saying that freezing of gait, it's a strategy of people with Parkinson's disease for not to fall. So when they're standing, they feel that they're falling, so they freeze. So we say, okay, what if we bring the patients like to a chair? We evaluated when they are sitting, ask them to do a stepping in place task, and see if they freeze when they are doing this. So that's why we look also into posture, and also we look into external or the help of external cues. In this case, we went we use auditory cueing. As I said before, I didn't say it, but we saw it in the video. If we remember the video of this patient, they were giving him some visual cues. So for him to try to move there. Also, if we kind of like give them some rhythm, we can help them to overcome a freezing or not to freeze when they're walking. So that's why we decided to go also with this condition. And here I have a video of one of the subjects that participated in our study.
Just do not.
So if we can see, he starts having like a good amplitude when doing the stepping in place task, but then suddenly he starts having kind of like problems with the amplitude of the movement. He starts having increased movements, and he just freezes. And he tries to overcome the freezing, and he's having heart trouble, heart issues doing this. And if you ask them, what do you feel when you freeze? They say, I just feel that my feet get glued to the floor. And even if I'm trying and I'm saying, okay, let's walk, let's move, they don't respond. So this is a video, it's a 2-minute video. It goes all the way like that. So it's just a demonstration to see how we were able to find freezing episodes when asking them to do the stepping in place task. So what was the objective of, or one of the objectives? We have many, and we still working with the data that we collected. If you see, we have so many tasks. If I go back with the conditions, we have 24 different tasks. We have more than 40 participants, so we have plenty data to analyze. But what we have done so far, the first thing that we really wanted to do was to standardize a tool to identify freezing. So in the literature, we can find so many different conditions to find or to define a freezing episode. Some people say that a freezing episode is when the participant doesn't move at all. Some others say that when they reach or they decrease 50% the amplitude, the initial amplitude of the movement. So if we apply these two conditions, if you're seeing like this graph, this one, we're looking into the superior inferior direction, the movement of the feet. So the blue line is the right foot, The red one is the left foot. So this one is a patient with Parkinson's disease who freezes, and this one is a healthy control subject. So if we go and apply these two different conditions, we can find that if we go with the 50% amplitude decreases, we can consider a freezing episode from here till here. So basically, the end of the trial. And if we go with no movement at all, a freezing episode will be only this part of the trial. So we can see that we are capturing so many different things. Like in one case, maybe the freezing episodes last like 15 to 20 seconds. In this case, with no movement at all, is just like a couple of seconds. So we propose a methodology using a mathematical approach that considers temporal and frequency domains. And we propose a methodology which is based on quiet standing baseline. So in other words, a methodology that considers no movement at all as a freezing episode. So this is kind of like just a graph where we are comparing the data that we observe from our algorithm and from the visual inspection that we have from some experts. And here is the numbers, the rock curve of the sensitivity and the specificity that we got from method one is our method. So basically the area under the curve, the curve is 0.89 with a sensitivity of 88% and a specificity of 91%, close to 91%. And if we see in general, in average, it's kind of like the best method, or it's a better method to identify freezing episodes. The other two methods are the ones that are commonly used, or the ones that were commonly used in literature. So what is the idea of having a standardized tool? So first of all, that we can compare studies that are done here in America, and the ones that are done in Asia, and the ones that are done in Australia by using the same methodology, right? So we want to really make these comparisons across the studies, because if we are using different methods, different tools, maybe we're looking into different things, different symptoms. So that's one of the things. The other one is that we really want to monitor people with Parkinson's disease in their daily life tasks, right? So basically that's the next step, that so we can kind of like implement this knowledge into rehabilitation engineering. We really want to implement the methodology that we develop into IMUs, inertial movement units, so we can track, monitor people with Parkinson's disease in their daily life tasks. And we can really see when they're freezing, why they're freezing, and see if we can help them somehow. So we don't really know why, but sometimes people with Parkinson's disease, when they are evaluated, when they are in the lab, they magically stop freezing. So maybe because they're like aware that they are being evaluated, and they do things more with conscious. We don't know why, but that's the idea. So we can bring to daily life tasks, and we can kind of like monitor their activities. The second thing that we really wanted to look at was the muscle activity before, during, and after they freeze. So we look into 4 muscles: rectus femoris, the proximal one in the front; biceps femoris, the proximal at the back; tibialis anterior, the one in the front of the body; and gastrocnemius medialis on the back of the body as the distal muscles. So how does the muscles should work? How do the muscles should work in a regular or in a normal scenario? So when they're standing, we should have these 2 muscles especially activated, which are muscles that somehow bring postural stability. And also a little bit, but also kind of like helps in the postural biceps femoris. What happens when they lift their leg? The rectus femoris are activated. What happens when they bring the leg back to the floor? The biceps femoris, sorry, are activated. So what happens when they freeze? This is what we found, and we hope that we can bring knowledge to help people that are freezing. So when they freeze, somehow unexplained, we don't know why, these muscles start to deactivate, the ones that bring postural stability. So because of this deactivation, to compensate, we have the biceps femoris activated somehow to bring or to compensate for that postural loss that we are having with this deactivation of these muscles. So we have these muscles activated at all times. So when they want to lift their leg, we have the rectus femoris activating. And because we have this activation, there is some movement inhibition. So the rectus femoris and the biceps femoris, sorry, are pair muscles that they are coordinated when people are moving. So if we activate both of them at the same time, there is some movement inhibition. So maybe this is what is happening, and this can explain what happens when people freeze. So what can we get from this knowledge? Basically, we can use this knowledge in rehabilitation engineering and in clinical applications. It can help to for the early diagnosis of freezing. If we start looking into this uncoordinated activation of the muscles, we can also develop rehabilitation therapies to work with this coordination. And also we can develop assistive technologies that improves quality of life. And maybe not related to these findings that I'm showing to you, but just to finish the presentation and wrap up what I just showed to you, these are two examples. We didn't do these examples. There are two examples that you can find easily on the internet and two commercial products. So the first one is the GNO spoon. Maybe some of you are familiar with this spoon, but basically what they're looking for is to kind of like prevent or help people with Parkinson's disease do daily life tasks, such as eating, right? So if they have like a severe tremor, this spoon, what does, stabilize by itself, so they don't, the food is not falling for their spoon. So this is one example. Then another example, which is related to what I just told you about, they are somehow, they having visual and auditory cues bring them some benefits and help them to walk and prevent from freezing. Recently, there is this company that developed this equipment, which is known as the NextStride, which
take back your freedom with NextStride.
I'm going to show you the video, and I'm just going to explain it really quick.
Attach NextStride to your cane, walker, or walking poles, and place 2 cues for overcoming freeze at your fingertips. NextStride features an audio cue metronome with adjustable volume and tempo controls, and a visual cue laser light with dual-axis adjustable positioning to help you keep moving. With NextStride at your side, you're ready to take the next step.
So from previous findings that they saw that people with Parkinson's disease bring or they have benefits when they're provided with visual and auditory cues, we can develop these kind of equipments, right? So basically it's an equipment that kind of like give them some rhythm to walk, and also they're giving them continuously a laser light that is giving them a cue where to step and where to walk, so they prevent from freezing. And well, that's all from my part. I hope it was an interesting talk to you. Just a big thank to all my people from Canada, from Montreal, from Ottawa, which are my supervisors, and all the lab peers, to all the institutions that somehow helped me to go through these 6 years of my life in Canada, and especially thank to my students, the biomedical engineering students at Universidad de Monterrey, which they collaborate a lot, and we have so many projects that we will be pleased to show to you in another time that are related to rehabilitation engineering. And well, gracias, thank you, and I'm open to any question, suggestion, or whatever you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from anyone? I have one question. That spoon you mentioned, what was the name?
The Gyno, G-Y-E-N-N-O. I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah.
Huh. That's very interesting. So
yeah, but I think there are like this one the one that I showed you is a recent one, but I remember like 8 to 10 years ago, like seeing that some company, I can't remember which one, bring this product to like a commercial market. and so many testimonials of people with Parkinson's disease that say that it changed somehow their quality of life. So basically what it's trying to do is kind of like not stop, but stabilize the ending of the spoon, so it's not affected with the regular or the tremor of people with Parkinson's disease. So if we have this regular spoon, the food is just falling off the spoon, right? So it's kind of like looking for that objective.
And that's available commercially, or is it?
Yeah, it's available commercially. I think this one was developed by a Chinese company, but yeah, it is available.
No, that's really interesting. Okay, Anyone else have a question?
I have a question, quick question. Ram, thanks for, as usual, a very stimulating talk. So I'm just curious to find out that when you are measuring the freeze, what kind of activities are you asking the person to do to measure the freeze? Because different kinds of movements may or may not have the freeze. So what are you expecting? Is there any pattern that you see in it?
So there are some actions that are reported in the literature that might trigger freezing. So when you bring patients to a stressful situation, they might freeze easily. For example, if you ask them to go through like a really narrow space, if you ask them to go into an elevator, if you ask them to do a dual task, you know, to walk and do a mathematical calculation in their minds. So it seems that the system reaches some saturation and it cannot kind of like process more data, and they just freeze. So there is a really interesting case in South Africa. This patient that it's his name is John Pepper. You can find information about this patient. If you see, like, it's a patient with Parkinson's disease, but if you see him, you won't even notice that he has Parkinson's disease, because there is no symptoms that can be identified. So they asked him, how can you prevent from symptoms to show up? So he says, like, every movement that I do in my life, I think about it. So if I'm gonna walk, I'm thinking when I'm flexing my hip, when I'm bringing up my leg, when I flex my knee, when I dorsiflex my ankle, every single detail of the movement. So what is really interesting, they bring this John Pepper patient and they ask him to walk and to do a dual task at the same time, and then you start seeing symptoms, because he kind of like stopped, or he started again doing the gait task automatically. So it seems that in Parkinson's disease, what is affected is the automatic movements. So it's quite interesting, because there are so many things going on. Like, one of them is that it's the automatic movements are affected. So if people start doing things like consciously thinking about every little detail, they are gonna overcome the symptoms. There is also this theory that if you stress the system, if you put the system into like a limit, there is gonna be a saturation, and then they're gonna start showing some symptoms. So there are many things that can trigger freezing episodes. We use some of them. That's why when I show the conditions slide, they say that maybe posture can trigger freezing episodes. Also, if we do more complicated tasks, so we kind of like thought at the time that if they use one limb versus two limbs, it means that when using two limbs, you have to coordinate movements, so it's more complex. So maybe it's gonna trigger more freezing episodes when using two limbs. And also having or not having external cues, visual cues, auditory cues. So that's mainly what it's reported in the literature, that situations that can trigger freezing episodes.
That's interesting, because that means you're also talking about if somebody is doing multitasking mentally, that can also trigger some kind of physical movement inactivity or freezing if it goes to that length, right? So stress is not only about the physical activity that's going to happen, stress is also about mentally what the person is processing.
Yeah, exactly. That all the cognition processing happening, you know, like I have to be doing 2 tasks at the same time. And at the end, the central nervous system is the one in charge of giving the signals of, okay, we have to move now this part of the body, we have to move this one. So yeah, there is something mentally going on there, and it seems that there is kind of like an interruption in the circuit that is in charge of doing movements.
So do you also measure the heart rate and things like that, or brain scanning, something when those kinds of activities are going on? Do you also...
No, we didn't do that, but it's something that we have been thinking a lot. One of our professors, she's an expert in EEG signals. So we are thinking on combining biomechanics with EEG, with brain signals. So to see what we can find there. And not only in Parkinson, like we really want to start working with cerebral palsy children and see differences before, during, and after going through rehabilitation therapies, neuro-rehabilitation therapies. But yeah, that's something that it's quite a great question, because it's something that we are really thinking in the future to combine biomechanics with body signals, brain signals. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Doesn't look like there's any more questions. So if it's okay, I guess we'll end this morning session. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to all the presenters. Oh, John, do you have a question? Okay.
Unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, because I think it deserves some kind of congratulations. I mean, it's excellent what you're doing, and I think it's very needed. I remember reading Vygotsky, and one of the things he did was in part of his research was to look at people with Parkinson's disease, and I think and that was, almost a century ago, but it's just, it's quite profound, and it's a great combination of different skills that you bring to this this task. Yeah, so really good. And as a Canadian, I'm glad to know that you got your education at McGill.
Yeah. We're still collaborating at McGill. Thank you so much for the comments. I really appreciate it. But yeah, Montreal is my second home. I've been going there like since I came back to Mexico 2016. I've been going back every year at least twice. Not the past one with COVID, but yeah, I really love it. I really enjoy it, and it's a big part of my life. So yeah, and great country. So I have really good friends in there, and I'm still working with my people from McGill. So yeah, I hope I'm gonna have this relation for a long time.
Yeah, great, excellent.
Thank you so much.
Okay, anyone else have a question? All right, so let's end the session then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll start again in the afternoon at 3:15. So that's when the afternoon session starts. So if all of you can join in, or whoever can, it will be a pleasure to have you there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.